What's up guys, and welcome to this review of Star Wars: The High Republic Trail of Shadows, the latest Star Wars High Republic comic book. And this one's a sort of spin-off of the mainline High Republic books, but also the spin-off of the mainline comic book series as well. It takes place after the events of the Rising Storm, in which the Nihil have found a weapon of some sort that can kill Jedi in a pretty brutal, horrifying way. It turns them to stone, it calcifies them, so it's pretty scary. So this comic book kicks off right where that book ended, in that the Jedi have appointed Emmerich, who they say is their lead investigator, their best investigator, and Lina Soh, the Chancellor, has appointed an investigator of her own called Sean. Together, Emmerich and Sean are going to team up and figure out what's going on here. What's this weapon? Can they stop it? And that's where this really kicks off. It's a very detective noir kind of book in many ways, at least for the first half of it, and we'll get into the specifics later on. So, if you haven't noticed, I got into Trail of Shadows a little later than the main book series, in that this is literally just came out and I am now just reviewing it. So, if you've read the main book series, the weapon, this monstrous thing that's killing the Jedi, is a very ominous, mysterious thing. It's not clear what exactly it is. Is it even a thing? Is it a weapon? Is it a monster? Who knows? In the books it's very vague and mysterious. So it's interesting that this comic book answers that. It is a monster, it is a creature. And it's a creature and a monster that feeds off the Force. So I feel like one of the biggest strengths of this comic book is that it does fill in the gaps. It does explain some things that probably should have been explained in the books. Because if you're just reading the books, it's still going to be vague, it's still going to be unclear what it is. And hopefully the books will have a big reveal at some point. But right now, the reveal is here in this comic book. And that's pretty cool. And by the way, it's called The Nameless. It does have a proper name, which I cannot pronounce or remember off the top of my head, but it's there. So I've already mentioned that this creature feeds off the Force. That's how it's killing the Jedi. It's literally sucking the life force out of them, it seems. Something that was introduced in The Rise of Skywalker, whether you like that or not. Personally, I don't like that power, but I think it makes a lot more sense in this creature, this monster. It reminds me a bit of the Ysalamir in the Throne trilogy of books years ago, although that didn't really feed off the Force, it just blocked the Force sort of thing. But one of the questions I have about this is that you've got a creature that can feed off the Force. Right, cool, that's an interesting idea. But doesn't the Force flow through all living beings? I could have swear that's a line somewhere in Star Wars, that the Force flows through all of us. So why is this creature only killing Jedi? Obviously the Jedi have a much bigger grasp of the Force than anyone else, so it makes sense that they are the big targets for the creature. But yeah, it seems like a bit of a plot hole here. Every living thing has the Force flowing through them to some extent. So why is it only the Jedi that are a real threat to this creature? Who knows? Doesn't explain it. But another thing about this creature is that I like how it induces hallucinations, and when you see it from the perspective of the Jedi, it's all it looks like a Van Gogh painting, for example, where it's all hallucinogenic stuff and it looks like they're high on drugs or something. It's really cool and interesting, and it backs up some of the things that we've seen in the main book series and so on and so forth. And it's also very reminiscent of Scarecrow from Batman, in the way that he induces fear in his victims. So anyway, at the heart of the story is this relationship between Emmerich, the Jedi, and Sean, the investigator. They initially team up, they've got very different approaches because one's a Jedi and one's not. Along the way they become friendly, and then along the way they get a lot friendlier. And it feels very rushed, to the point where all of a sudden at the end of one issue of this comic book, the characters are embracing and a hug and so on and talking about their feelings with each other. It's like, whoa, where did that come from? There was no hinting of that whatsoever, at least I didn't pick up on it. So the relationship that these two characters form and connect with feels very forced and rushed and unnatural. And I don't know if I have literally just missed out on the hinting here and there, or if it is just a fault of comic book writing in that you have to condense things down to the bare basics, and maybe they could have hammered that in a bit more, I don't know. But yeah, they do form a connection, they do form a relationship, which is interesting, except for the bit where it actually forms, I think is really rushed over. But let's talk about these characters a bit more. So Emeric the Jedi, he is a very by the books Jedi for the most part. He reminds me a bit of Qui-Gon Jinn in that regard, but although Qui-Gon Jinn did break the rules quite a bit. But the problem is that Emeric is a little boring, to be honest. He is just a generic Jedi investigator, and there's not a lot about his character. We know he grew up with Stellan, and we know he grew up with Avar Kriss and so on. So he's got history there, he's got connections and friendships with those. That's somewhat interesting. We know they were on a planet together where they learnt this like song, which is haunting them and coming into their memories. But beyond that, not a lot there, and he's not saying or doing a lot of exciting or interesting stuff either. Sian, meanwhile, she's got way too much going on, because she is a musician, an investigator. Later on, she dons some like battle armor and heavy weapons and stuff. It turns out she's a big fighter as well. She's an artist and all that stuff as well. So like, she's got all of these skills and abilities, but there's no explanation as to how she's got all these skills and abilities, or why she's got all these skills and abilities. And it feels like they're just throwing all these things at her just so it's convenient for the story, because this story needs her to have these abilities. And it's bizarre that this one person has all of this potential here. Now, these stuff does help flesh her out. On top of that, she's got a sense of humor. She does provide some funny lines here and there as well. So she's got a cool personality on top of all of that. But it does seem a bit unusual that this one person has all of this going on. Especially when, in comparison, Emeric doesn't have a lot at all. Maybe they could have shared them out a bit. So I mentioned already that the first half of the story feels like a detective noir. They are investigating this, they're following leads, they're going to crime scenes, there's some mysterious stuff going on with certain villains in the background who are trying to sell weapons, it seems, and behind the back of the Nihil. And all of that stuff's very interesting, and it feels like it's building up to something. But then the second half, that's kind of thrown aside, and it turns into more generic Star Wars action affair stuff, where it is just action scenes, and there are time jumps, and they're rushing through the story to get to the end point. There's, between one issue and the next, there's like seemingly months between them, in that between one issue and the next issue, that Emeric and Sian literally talk about how long they've been working on this case, and how they've worked pretty much day to day together for a long time now. And that's obviously helping to build their relationship, but we don't see any of that. So there's a huge time jump there where this investigation has continued, but we don't know what exactly's happened. So that feels odd. Why not just shorten the timescale and show us some of that stuff? But yeah, a bit disappointing that the investigation stuff kind of just stops and then it becomes an action thriller. And the main problem there is that it doesn't feel like a natural continuation of it. It feels like the first half was written by one person and the second half was written by another. And the worst of all is that the many action scenes, while very interesting and well depicted and so on and so forth, and pretty cool and interesting, they don't feel natural. A lot of them does feel like they're putting action scenes in there because, hey, young people are going to be reading this, they want to be action scenes in there. So it feels like the action scenes are forced in there to add some excitement and thrills, whereas I think it would have been a lot cooler if this was just a straight up detective noir focusing on the characters and the investigation all the way through. But like I said, the action scenes themselves are pretty good. It's just, do we really need them? So I mentioned the villains a bit and the Nihil. Dr. Uttersond is the main Nihil antagonist here. He is on the run from the Nihil, it seems, or maybe not on the run, but he's working behind their backs trying to sell weapons and information and so on and so forth. He's going out of his way to do certain things. And what I like about this is that Dr. Uttersond is kind of a character that in the later books of the High Republic, he's kind of vanished a little bit. He's not as prevalent anymore. And this kind of explains why that is. It is filling in a gap. So it's not just filling in a gap in terms of this weapon, the Nameless, and it's not just filling in what the Jedi are doing about it, it's filling in what's happening with this particular villain and expanding on what's going on with the Nihil. It seems the Nihil are spreading out. The Nihil are dissolving in many ways and forming into the new Nihil in a sort of way. And I really like that. I figured those do a good job explaining where Dr. Uttersond is, why the Nihil are falling apart, why the Nihil aren't as strong or cohesive a unit as they once were. And I think on top of that, it actually does a really good job of explaining Dr. Uttersond's motives. It turns out he's got a family on the side, he's got relationships outside of the Nihil. He is a multifaceted, multi-layered character, whereas before he just seemed like a bit of a crazy mad doctor. So I like that. I like that we're fleshing him out and it's in this comic book form. It is a little on the nose, it isn't the most original stuff ever, but it's there and it fleshes him out a bit more, makes him a bit more likable. And to the point where, towards the end of this comic book, not going to say what happens, but it does make you kind of care for him a little bit. So I mentioned how there's this song that the Jedi learned when they were a kid, which was always being sang to them. This is a recurring element. Whenever the Jedi are like hallucinating or having nightmares around the Nameless and so on, they're hearing this song being like whispered in the background. It's a cool, creepy little thing, but it's not fully explained. How does this song come back to haunt them? Is this part of the hallucination? Why is this suddenly being remembered? Because Emmerich is constantly thinking of this song, he's constantly hearing it wherever he goes. It's in his mind. And we get it, we all get that moment where there's a song in the back of your mind, but it's not quite explained why this song in particular is coming to Emmerich all of a sudden, because he hasn't encountered the Nameless. At least he does encounter it, spoilers, in this comic book, but up until that point, he's not encountered it, so he's not under the hallucination. So how does he have this song recurring in his head all of a sudden? It seems very coincidental. But yeah, it does provide a creepy motif that runs through this comic book and adds into like his backstory as well. But I think I just wanted a little bit more explanation for it. And that's Star Wars The High Republic Trail of Shadows. Good artwork. The artwork's actually a little bit different from the main High Republic line. It's much more scratchy, let's say, much more, I don't even know how to describe art at all, but it looks a little bit different, but it still looks pretty cool and interesting. Comic book wise, it's a good comic book, I would say. It does fill in the gaps, some gaps from the High Republic so far, and I would say it's a must read because of that. It does flesh out the Nameless, it does flesh out Dr. Uttersond. How important Dr. Uttersond is going to be moving forward remains to be seen, as with a lot of stuff in the High Republic. The Nameless though is definitely going to be very important moving forward, and I feel like this is a good introduction to that expands on their introduction in the prior books. So yeah, this is a must read. It is enjoyable. The first half's a detective story, which I thought was really cool and interesting. Second half feels a little bit rushed. They're jumping through time a bit more, and the relationship at the core of it does feel a bit unnatural in certain ways. But overall, I like this. I think it is going to be like a limited thing. I don't think we're going to get another volume of Trail of Shadows, but it's possible. What's more likely though is that this is going to feed into the main High Republic comic book line in the future. But yeah, I enjoyed this, I like this. It's not the best comic book ever, it's not the best High Republic story I've ever read so far, but it is an important one and I appreciate that. They're not just releasing it to make money, it actually is adding to this High Republic. So yeah, go read this, and if you've liked this review, subscribe to my channel to get more content like this, and of course follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @the_GrantBird. Thanks for watching.